Interesting. Right, man. Well, that's a lot of buses.
That's a lot of buses. This hearing will come to order. Before we begin, I'd like to explain to the panel members that are here, and of course the audience, that Ranking Member Calvert is not here because the President of the United States, George Bush, called a special meeting of the Republican caucus this morning. Evidently they're all down at the White House. The meeting was scheduled to be finished at 9:30 from what I understand, so we hope Ranking Member Calvert will join us as soon as he possibly can. But in the meantime, we have his approval to go ahead and proceed, and since time is money, time is valuable, we appreciate the panel's presence. I thought I'd kick the hearing off, and we look forward to hearing from you after I share my opening statement with you. As I've said, we have a distinguished panel, and I look forward to your testimony. The topic of today's hearing, the status of the nation's Next-Gen Initiative and the Multi-Agency Joint Planning and Development Office tasked with overseeing the initiative, is one of the most important topics that we will address this year. It is important because it concerns the future of America's air transportation system, and the question is whether we will have a system that will be able to meet the needs of our 21st century economy. I think we can all agree that we need to be able to answer that question in the affirmative for the health of our economy, the quality of life of our citizens, the safety of our flying public, and our international competitiveness. In short, we all want the Next-Gen Initiative to succeed. Yet hope and good intentions by themselves are not going to be sufficient to ensure success. We're going to need commitment, accountability, and ultimately effective performance by all involved. I'm troubled by indications that all may be not going as well as hoped with the Next-Gen effort, and I hope that our witnesses will be able to shed some light on the true status of the initiative. For example, we held a hearing before this subcommittee exactly a year ago. The Department of Transportation and Joint Planning and Development Office told us then that a memorandum of understanding defining the Next-Gen partner agencies' roles and responsibilities would be finalized within the next few weeks. 1 year later, it's clear that that did not happen and still hasn't happened. At that same hearing, we were told that the JPDO planned to release an enterprise architecture for Next-Gen in the summer of 2006. That did not happen and still hasn't happened. The NASA Authorization Act of 2005 directed NASA to align its Aerospace Systems Research Program projects so that they directly support the objectives of the JPDO's Next Generation Air Transportation System Integrated Plan, and to do that by the end of 2006. Based on at least some of the witness testimony, that alignment doesn't appear to have happened either, and a similar situation exists with respect to the FAA's R&D programs. In addition, today's witnesses are echoing concerns we have heard in previous hearings about the negative impact that NASA's uncertain commitment to its aeronautics program is having on a host of important R&D initiatives. Equally troubling from the standpoint of management continuity, there have been 3 JPO directors in the past 3 years and 2 NGATS Institute executive directors in the past 2 years, with the Institute position currently vacant. Moreover, the head of the FAA's Air Traffic Organization has recently left the agency. The FAA administrator is scheduled to depart later this year, and the Department of Transportation has a new secretary. In addition, the Multi-Agency Senior Policy Council, which was established to provide high-level advice and policy guidance to the JPDO on the Next-Gen Initiative, has met just 3 times in the past 3 years, and not once in the past year. Finally, we haven't yet seen a clear plan from FAA and the JPDO for implementing agreed-upon next-gen technologies and procedures into the national airspace expeditiously. That is worrisome, because it is clear that there are very real costs associated with undue delay. Now, I want to be clear that my comments are not criticisms of the dedication or commitment of the JPDO team. I recognize that developing and implementing the next-gen system are enormous challenges. However, we need to take a look both at where progress is being made and, equally importantly, where improvement is needed. That's what today's hearing is intended to accomplish. And again, I want to appreciate my appreciation to our witnesses for helping the subcommittee in that task. Now, at this point, I would normally recognize Chairman Calvert former Chairman Calvert, now Ranking Member Calvert, for his opening remarks. And I'd also want it to be known that if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, that those statements would be added to the record. But given that Chairman Calvert is not here at this point, let me introduce our panel of witnesses. And I'll move across from my left to right, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Leader, after I've introduced everybody. Mr. Charles Leader is the Director for the Joint Planning and Development Office of the Federal Aviation Administration. He is in charge of the planning and the development of the Next Gen initiative. Next to him, we have Dr. Gerald Dillingham, who's a Director of the Physical Infrastructure Issues in the Government Accountability Office and has been actively involved in GAO's oversight of aviation-related issues. Next to him, we have the Honorable John Douglas, who was formerly Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he currently is the President and CEO of the Aerospace Industries Association. He also served on the Aerospace Commission, and Mr. Douglas is a frequent visitor to this committee. It's always good to see you, Mr. Douglas. And I'm pleased to introduce, finally, Dr. Bruce Carmichael. He's the Director of the Aviation Applications Program at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR, which is located in my district in Boulder, Colorado. Dr. Carmichael holds a MS from Northwestern University in Applied Mathematics and a PhD from the University of Maryland in Computer Science. His more recent work has been involved with the aviation industry and automation of maintenance processes, air traffic control, and weather information. He's also been involved in system engineering of improved FAA automation and weather systems. He's currently the co-lead of the forecasting group, the JPDO Weather Integrated Product Team. I again want to welcome all of you. As you all know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which members of the subcommittee will each have 5 minutes to ask questions in each round of questioning. The lights there are helpful to you, I'm sure. Mr. Leader, we'll start with you. The floor is yours.
Charles Leader, and I'm the Director of the Multi-Agency Joint Planning and Development Office. With your permission, I'd like to submit my formal statement for the record and take this opportunity to make a few opening remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. I think you will agree that the United States has the safest and most efficient air traffic control system in the world. It handles a staggering amount of traffic every day. This includes passenger flights, air cargo, military operations, unmanned aerial vehicles, space launches. But as capable as it is, we are already seeing the limits of the current system. Delays and cancellations are growing, and unless we begin to transform the system now, the problems are only going to get worse. The issues concerning the future capacity and flexibility of the National Air Transportation System are matters that the House and this committee understand very well. In 2003, Vision 100, the FAA reauthorization, chartered the Next Generation Air Transportation System Initiative and established the Joint Planning and Development Office. The scope of this undertaking, as well as the length of the commitment, is almost unprecedented in government. It involves the joint efforts of the Departments of Homeland Security, Commerce, Defense and Transportation, as well as NASA and the FAA. But it is far more than just a large government program. It also represents a unique collaboration with industry. NextGen is a long-term transformation of our nation's air transportation system. We are leveraging existing technologies such as satellite-based navigation and networking, while at the same time developing new capabilities and new technologies that will change our entire approach to managing the air transportation system. Often, one of the challenges in explaining the next-gen system is putting what we're doing in context. With that in mind, an approach I'd like to take in explaining next-gen is to relate the technology and procedural improvements we're making to the air transportation system to applying the technologies in ways that we're familiar with. One good example of a day-to-day application of the kind of technology, one that relates to next-gen, is the General Motors product that comes with many of their new cars called OnStar. Although applied to automobiles and operating in the two-dimensional environment of roads and vehicles, It uses GPS technology as well as voice and data links to help drivers find out where they are, and at the same time uses the same type of voice and data links that we will be using in the next-gen system. The OnStar data link can receive messages from the GM command center sent directly to the automobile's computer to do such things as unlock the doors, report problems with the vehicle, or report an automobile accident. We will be using the same sort of existing technology in NextGen to allow flight crews to communicate, navigate, and report their positions while operating within the National Airspace System. Implementation of NextGen has already begun. 2 programs, both foundational technologies, are the Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, ADSB, System-Wide Information Management, SWIM. Both of these programs are funded and already underway. ADSB relies on GPS and is critical in developing next-gen satellite-based navigation and control capabilities. SWIM is developing our key networking capabilities and will establish the critical networking infrastructure. Indeed, I want to make a point about SWIM and network-enabled operations, namely that DoD, DHS, and the FAA are each contributing $5 million to a real demonstration of this capability later this year. Each of these programs and the capabilities they represent are essential in beginning the transformation of our current air traffic control system, from one that relies on voice communications and ground-based navigation to one that is satellite-based, network-enabled, and uses advanced digital communication. By its very nature, this kind of initiative needs to use a portfolio-based approach. In other words, the approach has to be one that allows the Joint Planning and Development Office to integrate a wide range of research initiatives and investments. That's why some of the most important products for the JPDO have been its 3 planning tools: the Concept of Operations, which went out for final review last month, the Enterprise Architecture, which will be released for stakeholder review in late May, and the Integrated Work Plan, which will be released for comment in July. These will be the guides for the future research, investment, and implementation of the next-gen system. I also want to make a point that Dr. Carmichael will talk about in further depth in a few moments to express the importance of weather research, and weather forecasting in meeting the objectives of the next-gen system. The success of NextGen relies heavily on improvements in gathering better weather data and implementing a common probabilistic forecasting capability. That's why we're working with each agency that has a weather responsibility to establish a common approach to developing this technology and the research strategy that's required to be pursued. NextGen is a long-term initiative and in its early stages. If given the authority and resources, I believe the JPDO can be catalytic in transforming the national airspace system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Dr. Dillingham, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Udall. My testimony today on the status of JPDO's efforts to plan and coordinate the development of the next gen focuses on 3 questions. First, what has been the outcome of JPDO's efforts to establish its organizational and operational structure? Second, what is the status of JPDO's technical planning? And third, to what extent has funding been identified for near-term research and development? Regarding JPDO's structure and operations, our research shows that the JPDO partner agencies have worked together to develop key strategies for implementing NextGen. JPDO has also leveraged its partner agency resources by staffing various levels of its organization with partner agency employees. Additionally, the establishment of the Institute provides a method for involving non-federal stakeholders in planning NextGen. Our work has identified some organizational issues that, if not addressed, could seriously jeopardize the JPDO's chances of success. For example, the frequency of leadership turnover at JPDO and the Institute has raised concerns about the stability of the office and the future of the initiative. During its 3 years of existence, JPDO has had 3 directors, and there have been 2 directors of the Institute. Additionally, some stakeholders have expressed concerns about the productivity and the pace of JPDO's efforts. Concerns have also been raised by some private sector stakeholders as to whether potential conflict of interest issues are adequately addressed by current Institute policy. To its credit, JPDO officials are currently proposing several changes to JPDO's structure and operations to improve the effectiveness of the organization. We believe that these changes could help address stakeholder concerns, but their effectiveness will need to be monitored, evaluated, and linked to a policy of continuous improvement. Furthermore, we believe that FAA and JPDO must also identify and address the factors that have contributed to the frequent turnover of its senior management. JPDO also has a continuing challenge in ensuring the involvement of all key stakeholders. For example, active air traffic controllers and technicians are not currently involved in next-gen planning. Our analysis of FAA's current air traffic control modernization program has shown that involving stakeholders is a very critical requirement for successful implementation of efforts such as next-gen. With regard to our second question about JPDO's technical planning, as you heard Mr. Leader testify, JPDO has made significant progress towards completing several key technical planning documents, including a concept of operations, an enterprise architecture, and an integrated work plan. We think that JPDO is focusing on the right types of planning tools for the next-gen initiative. In our earlier testimony before this committee, we know that JPDO is fundamentally a planning and coordinating body that lacks authority over the key human and technological resources of its partner agencies. To its credit, the JPDO has begun to explore ways to help ensure that it has the needed resources and authority. For example, JPDO is working on aligning enterprise architectures of its partner agency. It's also working with OMB to establish a cross-agency mechanism for next-gen funding decisions. And it's working with FAA to revamp its key planning tool, the Operation Evolutionary Partnership, to focus on the next-gen effort. Institutionalizing these types of collaborative processes will be critical for JPDO to maintain its achievement and ensure further progress despite personnel changes and the competing priorities of the partner agencies. Now I'd like to turn to our final question. To what extent has funding been identified for near-term research and development? FAA and JPDO recently estimated the total federal cost for next-gen will range between $15 and $22 billion. However, questions remain as to which organizations will fund and conduct some of the necessary R&D and demonstration projects. This R&D will be key to making decisions about next-gen technology, developing regulations, and addressing human factor issues. In the past, a significant part of this research was conducted by NASA. FAA's R&D Advisory Committee has estimated that it would cost nearly $500 million in additional funding and delay next-gen by 5 years for FAA to develop the necessary infrastructure and assume the previous NASA R&D. According to JPDO, the organization is exploring ways to address the R&D funding challenge, and they expect to issue a report in August of this year. Mr. Chairman, in closing, I want to emphasize that JPDO has achieved much in its short existence, but much remains to be done. This is one of the federal government's most complicated undertakings. There are many challenges on the horizon that will have to be overcome and will require the joint efforts of the Congress, the partner agencies, and the private sector aviation community. Failure is not an option. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Dillingham. Secretary Douglas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to ask your permission, sir, to submit my written statement for the record and
Without objection, so ordered.
cover this briefly with a summary. Sir, my first involvement, deep immersion in this issue came back in 2002 when I was a commissioner on the bipartisan commission on the future of the aerospace industry. And one of the extraordinary things that the commissioners discovered was that if you looked at the capacity of our air traffic control system and all of the estimates for growth in the air traffic in the United States, the two didn't match. There was a very big disconnect there, and we could see fairly clearly that we were not going to be able to stay ahead of the demand unless we did something radically different. And one of the ideas that came from the Commission was the creation of the JPDO, or Joint Office, to develop this new system. And the vision of this Joint Office was that the technology that we need to do this task largely exists in other parts of the government. It exists in the Department of Defense, it exists in NASA, and other parts of the government, and we all knew that this was going to be an episodic thing that we do about every 40 or 50 years as a nation, a very complex task, and so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and from that was born the concept of the Joint Planning and Development Office. In the 5 years since this report was issued, we've seen the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and to its enormous credit, Congress, largely led by this and several other subcommittees, support this concept. And I would associate myself with much of what you said in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. And so we now, after 5 years, we find that much of the planning has been implemented, but it's time for us to begin to actually implement the development of the new system. And as we begin this task, it's really important to remember, as both of my predecessors have said this morning, this is an enormously complex task. There's probably not another one that I can think of that is as broad an interagency effort. But the payoff, if we do it right, is huge in savings for the American people, both in the development process and in the important results of the project once it's implemented. It's also important, though, Mr. Chairman, to note that time is short. 5 years have gone by since this Commission report, and there are people who are believing that we may see a meltdown this summer of the system because of thunderstorms and things of that nature, and traffic is back ahead of where it was before 9/11. So we in industry share your concern about the need to get on with this, and we're very concerned that these research and development funding shortfalls, particularly in NASA and the Department of Homeland Security, need to be taken care of now and not pushed off into the out years. I've been told that there are some alignments coming into place as far as 2009 and 2010 down at OMB, and we think that is too late. So we believe that there is some additional accountability needed here to pull all of this together. We think JPDO needs to be accountable to the Congress. We believe that the agencies that support the JPDO also need to be accountable to Congress. We are particularly concerned about the lack of regular meetings of the Senior Policy Oversight Committee that you mentioned in your opening statement. I can tell you, sir, I was a part of most of the big joint programs in the Department of Defense when I was a general officer, when I was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and I've learned from hard experience that you have to meet very regularly to oversee these very complex projects. Finally, my last point that I would like to make, sir, is that industry is very much a partner in this effort, not only in the development of the system, but in the financing of the system. We expect that our side of the cost will probably be somewhere between $15 and $30 billion over the development cycle, and it's enormously important for industry to have the confidence that the government part of the program will stay on track. And when the industry loses confidence that it will stay on track, then the funding dries up. Obviously, the airlines don't want to equip if they don't believe that a new system will actually be put into implementation. So in summary, Mr. Chairman, I think this committee and the Congress has an important role to play in focusing the authority properly on the JPDO, making sure the resources are available. If those things happen, I think what you'll see is that industry will do its part and the other parts of the government will fall in line if there is some strong oversight, especially from the Congress. That concludes my statement this morning.
Thank you very much, Secretary Douglas. And Dr. Carmichael, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chairman Udall. I would request submission of my testimony, written testimony for the record.
I'm sorry, yes, unanimous consent so ordered. Let the record show that Dr. Carmichael's full remarks are included in the record.
As you heard from Mr. Leader, aviation weather research is critical to the successful development and implementation of NextGen. 70% of delays in today's system are attributed to weather. That's the bad news. The good news is that as much as 60% of today's delays and cancellations for weather stem from potentially avoidable weather situations. Enhanced weather forecasts, as well as improved use of forecasts, can contribute to a reduction in these avoidable weather impacts. Improved weather information supports an agile decision-making process to manage air traffic expected in the future system. It allows the system to smoothly mitigate the potential impacts of summer and winter storms, turbulence, en route icing, and reduced ceiling visibility conditions. This can be achieved only through the introduction of new technologies related to the observation, forecasting, dissemination, and integration of improved weather information into air traffic management decision support tools and processes. The investment in aviation weather safety research must continue in order to ensure that an increase in accidents does not accompany an increase in traffic. Such investments have yielded and will continue to yield critical improvement for the flying public. A promising program initiative of the JPDO is to develop a next-gen network-enabled weather system to be executed by the FAA, DoD, and NOAA to integrate the forecasting and dissemination capabilities of the different weather forecasting agencies. The JPDO weather team has compiled a list of 130 research tasks needed for NextGen. These tasks address a number of issues that are critical if the nation is to successfully integrate aviation weather into NextGen. Many of the issues are known and research is already underway. Research and improved forecasting and integration of forecasts into decision support tools is absolutely critical to NextGen. It must be recognized that sustained and predictable aviation weather research funding at a significantly increased level is required in each of the JPDO stakeholder agencies. This funding stability is needed to allow the laboratories to hire, develop, and maintain the highly specialized researchers needed to address the complex issues at hand. The community of weather and automation researchers has been hard at work for 3 years supporting the JPDO planning process almost totally on a collateral basis. To maintain this very talented experience base, it is critical that funding be appropriated to begin to directly support this expert team. Changes to NASA's Aeronautics program are having a serious impact on the effectiveness of the Aviation Weather Initiative. The NASA Aeronautics program has experience in ATM decision support and is a logical partner for the JPDO and FAA in this endeavor. However, in my view, the current NASA funding direction in aeronautics provides little hope for a strong effort by NASA in the area of integration of weather into automation tools. This is unfortunate. In conclusion, aviation weather research is vital to the successful development and implementation of NextGen. Most of the technology needed to build NextGen has already been invented. Weather remains an area with significant invention still to be done if we're going to successfully integrate it into NextGen. All agencies and laboratories with relevant skills must be brought to bear on these difficult problems if we are to be successful. But current changes to NASA's aeronautics program are having a significant negative impact on the effectiveness of the Aviation Weather Integration Initiative. This concludes my testimony, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Dr. Carmichael, thank you for your testimony. At this point, we'll open our first round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Leader, I'd like to start with you, if I might. As you know, the JPDO, as it's currently organized, has no direct budgetary or programmatic authority over its participating agencies. Yet, as we've heard, and certainly in my remarks I also mentioned, if those agencies don't work together and make the necessary resource and R&D commitments, the Next Gen initiative is unlikely to succeed. And that's why I'm troubled by the fact that a year after the subcommittee was told that an MOU would be signed that clearly defined each participating agency's roles and responsibilities, it still hasn't happened. Given that it's already slipped by a year, it's clear that one or more significant issues are holding up the signing of the MOU. Could you outline what those issues are and how you intend to address them? And to give the heads up to the other witnesses, if they would like to comment after your comments, I'd be eager to hear what they have to say. In particular, how important is it that an MOU be agreed upon by the participating agencies? Mr. Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It is correct that we currently do not have a signed memorandum of agreement. We have a signature on the draft by the Secretary of Transportation and by the Administrator of NASA. The Department of Defense, is my belief, has reviewed the draft MOU and is prepared to sign it, but is waiting for the Department of Air Force to be recognized as the executive agent for next generation issues. Secretary Wynne has, I believe, already seen it, and it has been through the DoD General Counsel's office. So it's a question now of getting the authority for the Air Force to be the signator on the memorandum of agreement. It is probably more important symbolically to have the memorandum of agreement signed. More important would be the active commitment of the various departments and agencies to the success of the initiative.
Other panelists care to comment? Dr. Dillingham?
Yes, Mr. Chairman Udall. I agree that the memorandum of understanding is important because I think you need something in place that is going to span the change in senior executives in the various places, be it the secretaries of the various cabinet departments, the administrator of FAA. All of those are sort of changing positions, changing people, personalities, and this is a long-term undertaking. And I think there needs to be some document, some formal document that's there. On the other hand, I think some of the things that are also taking place now are very useful in that vein. For example, I think working through OMB to have an Exhibit 300 where the next gen projects across the government are tagged as such, and it makes a portfolio is very important, because that's sort of where the money is. It's also important, as well as having that sort of agreement. Similarly, I think if JPDO can go through, again, working through OMB to coordinate the various enterprise architectures across the various participating partner agencies, that again is sort of, in a strategic way, it's the kind of thing that will give some institutionalization to JPDO. So the memorandum is important, but these other kinds of activities are also useful and important, I think.
Douglas.
Yes, sir. These things are vital. I was just thinking back in my memory when I was a young officer. I was a business manager on the Joint Cruise Missile Project office. You may recall Jimmy Carter canceled the B-1 bomber, and he said, we're going to put cruise missiles on the B-52s. And so we had a memorandum of agreement which was imposed down on the Navy and the Air Force to go have the Navy develop these missiles. And even with the agreement, sir, there were daily arguments about who was going to do what and so on. The agreements just began the first step in a lengthy discussion of agencies working together. My experience on Joint Strike Fighter later, when I was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, also there are memorandums of agreement between the services for things like air-to-air missiles, so that if we develop a new air-to-air missiles that can work on the F-15, the F-16, the F-18, the Joint Strike Fighter, so on. These things are fundamental. If you don't have them, the dialogue that comes later when you try to actually implement things together is almost impossible to put into any rational context. So I can't emphasize, as an old joint program guy myself, how important these things are, sir.
Function follows form, I hear you saying, Mr. Douglas. Dr. Carmichael, would you like to comment? At this juncture, the chairman would like to recognize an important and contributing member of this committee, Mr. Rothman from New Jersey. Mr. Rothman, you have
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony and your appearance today. I have another hearing with the Defense Subcommittee with Secretary Gates and the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff next door, so I'm going to be bowing out after my questions. But please don't take that departure and my late arrival after I was there first as a lack of interest. I am passionate and completely and totally focused on what you're doing, and in particular the work of the FAA, frankly, for lots of reasons. Number one, there's an airport in my district, Teterboro Airport, and we also have air traffic overhead from Newark and from LaGuardia, and JFK is in the nearly immediate vicinity as well. So hundreds of thousands of people in the New York metropolitan area are suffering today with the present levels of activity from aircraft noise, emissions from aircraft that are not healthful, they're unhealthy, and with living every day with the masses of aircraft coming over our houses at various altitudes, one after another, after another, after another. And you folks want more aircraft in the sky over our heads? Let me ask you this question I asked the previous panel, which I would respectfully ask you to consider. Let's assume that you could get your wish on technology. You could make it silent, planes silent. You could make them without any harmful emissions, and you could make it safe for them, and you could make it safe for them to operate wing to wing to wing to wing, and it could cover the sky, the horizon, so much so that it blotted out the sun. Is that what you're shooting for? Is that the kind of world you want you to live in? Or you want your children to live in? Is that progress? Is that necessary? Commerce is supposed to serve and benefit the quality of life of the people. That's why we have commerce. But when the level of commerce becomes harmful to your physical well-being or your emotional well-being and becomes destructive, then commerce has got to find a different avenue of pursuing its goals. And so I read with some interest, discouragement. I saw that you have as one of the strategies in related agencies, develop environmental protection that allows sustained economic growth, aviation growth. And I'm assuming by environmental protection you mean noise and emissions. And that's fine, that's great. But I tell you, there are millions of people around the country, millions, who are fed up. And they don't care if you can achieve these, more efficiency in the sky and pack more planes into the sky. That's not what they want. And when a two-lane road becomes crowded, people have to find another avenue, another way to get where they want to go. And so I'll tell you, I for one, and I understand the importance of aviation to our economy and to our security, etc. Completely. But it is not going to be at the expense of the quality of life of the people, which is already too great, of the people who are paying too great a price. And so I respectfully but forcefully plead with you to take these matters into consideration. Otherwise, I will be a uniform, even bigger thorn in everybody's side, and I know that I represent millions and millions of people across this country. But about my question about the wing-to-wing-to-wing hypothetical, have we thought about that? And if you say that's fine, then that says something about your view of the quality of life of the people of this nation. If you say wing to wing to wing and it blots out the sun, it's just too much, then tell me where you draw the line and what's a reasonable limit on blotting out the sun or constant massive plane line overhead, if there's time for an answer.
Mr. Douglas.
Congressman, I think most people recognize that there is a natural tension in a democracy among constituents of different value streams. If you live around an airport, you see the negative side of air congestion. Probably it's a part of your life much more than if you're a person who wants to go visit your granddaughter in California and you are a working person and you only have a day or so that you can take off. You can't spend the whole time to go in your car or go on a train or some other factor. But the fact of it is, sir, the sky is a big place. And I would ask you, I'm sure you fly home to New Jersey occasionally, look around when you fly and how. Think of how seldom it is when you're in the air that you can actually see another airplane. It's a rare thing. I'm an aviator. I've been in the Air Force and served in the Navy, and I tend to look out the window and look for other airplanes because that's what I did when I was on active duty. But you seldom see them. It's a very big place, and the truth of it is there is a great margin of accommodation here. Between the millions and millions of Americans who have an interest in flying for business reasons or recreational reasons or whatever, and the countervailing interests of people that live around airports. And I will tell you, sir, that the industry, both the manufacturers and the airlines themselves, are absolutely dedicated to doing everything they can to relieve the burden on the people around.
I know my time is up, Mr. Secretary, but we don't live within Teterboro Airport's a little general aviation airport, which causes a lot of problems, and they fly low, and Newark flies high, and that can be fixed, and I hope that will. But the people who are affected are living further and further away from airports, who report, and I'm there at their homes, and see these planes coming overhead. So it may not seem like when you look out a window, but when you look up on your kid's soccer field and you see the planes every day. I know I've taken too much time, but it's not just people who moved into a house within sight of an airport. They're living farther and farther away and never thought they would be affected by an airport or the region's airports who are now being affected. So it's getting worse, in my view.
Gentleman's time's expired. We have been joined by former Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member Calvert now, and I know he has an opening statement, and then I'd like to also extend to him 5 minutes for questions if he'd like to use those 5 minutes. Mr. Calvert.
Well, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. We had a meeting with the President of the United States, so he trumped you, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman. So, but I'm glad I got back to give this statement and to thank you. I do have to fly back to California later this afternoon. I do it every week, and I'm glad that there are airports that take me, and I can get back here to Washington early Monday morning. But anyway, I want to thank you for scheduling this hearing to assess the progress of the Joint Planning and Development Office. And thanks to our witnesses for taking time out of your busy schedule to appear before us this morning. Even though this subcommittee held our last hearing on JPDO just last year, In my mind, Congress can't exercise enough oversight in such a critically important and fast-paced program, much to the dismay, I suppose, of the JPDO's leadership. But I think it speaks volumes about Congress's interest in ensuring the successful development of the next generation air traffic management system. Failure to keep pace with growth in air travel would be disastrous to this economy. I look forward to hearing from you. I'll have a couple of questions, hopefully before we have votes on the floor, and get your candid assessment about the progress that has been made or not made and challenges remaining in meeting the goals of the Vision 100 legislation. I know teams of federal and non-federal experts have been working hard to put in place the processes and management structures required for such a massive undertaking. But in a few minutes I have remaining, I'll limit my comments to NASA's evolving role in air traffic management research. When Vision 100 legislation was enacted, Congress anticipated the Federal Aviation Administration as the operator of our nation's ATM system, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration as our nation's leading aeronautics and R&D organization would continue to work collaboratively as they have for more than 40 years. NASA's researching and developing long-lead, high-risk technologies, FAA adapting their research products to incorporate them into a national aerospace system. It's been a productive relationship, and over the years, each agency has collaborated their R&D programs and budgets to reflect that. The JPDO recognized NASA's expertise early on by selecting them to lead the Agile Aerospace Integrated Product Team. In the last 18 months, however, subsequent to the creation of the JPDO, NASA's Aeronautics R&D program has undergone, as you know, a major reorganization. I don't dispute the rationale for making the reforms, but NASA also made a fundamental change in its R&D relationship with FAA by limiting future research to a level of technical maturity far lower than they have in years past. This has left the FAA with no recourse other than to cover the technology shortfall by increasing its own R&D budgets. Money, as you know, especially around here, is fungible, but talent and expertise doesn't easily transfer. And simply stated, my concern is that it will take FAA several years to adapt this change. I remain concerned that this early grand endeavor, now known as Next Gen, one of the two key partners, is changing the rules of the game. And it's happening at a time when R&D roadmaps are being finalized, and spending for developing and integrating new technologies is about to ramp up. I would strongly prefer that NASA's Aerospace Management Program continue to advance promising technologies to a high level, thus freeing the FAA to focus on integrating them into Next Gen. It's my sincere hope that NASA's actions don't hinder JPDO's efforts to develop technologies upon which Next Gen will be reliant upon. So with that, I want to thank you for that statement, Mr. Chairman, and allow me to bid that, and I have a question for everyone. When JPDO was first created, it was established as an adjunct to the Federal Aviation Administration. But over the last year, the JPDO has become more tightly integrated within the FAA. Are there any concerns that JPDO's assimilation with the Federal Aviation Administration is viewed by other federal partners as being a proxy for FAA and not an honest broker working with other federal agencies? And I guess we'll start with you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you, sir. I have heard the same concern expressed, but I do not share that view. In fact, I think even during the course of my relatively short tenure here, the links to the other partner agencies have been strengthened and they've become more engaged.
Excuse me. I think, over the last year or so, the integration of JPDO and FAA, particularly through their OEP plan, has, on one hand, it might have been seen by some as sort of being too entwined, but I think the other way to look at this is that The JPDO is the vision part of the air traffic control modernization program, and the current FAA is handling what is in place now. And it's very important that they work together, and that there is a sort of an exchange of information and ideas and approach with FAA. I think that what we just got through talking about, this memorandum of understanding, as well as the other initiatives that are underway to bring all of the agencies closer together, are things that need to be completed. Our research shows that there's sort of a mixed bag in terms of the relationship between the various partner agencies. In some cases, like NASA and Commerce, the relationship seems to be pretty strong and the kind of way we want it to be. In some other cases, Homeland Security, DOD to some extent, it's still a work in progress. So I think at this point, there's pluses and minuses associated with the arrangements.
Well, sir, to really answer your question, you have to go back to 2002 when I was a commissioner on this commission on the future of the industry, and we found ourselves in the extraordinary position of the FAA's OEP having an improvement program that didn't match the growth in the industry. And you don't see that too often in government. You do see it occasionally, but you wouldn't see the Department of Defense, for example, sending troops, having a plan to build a tank, for example, that they knew would be defeated by the enemy tank in a one-on-one battle, or they would actually plan to build a fighter airplane they knew was inferior to one that would come up against in combat. We try to stay ahead of what we know the demand or the threat or whatever is. And so the commissioners detected a feeling that there was something wrong here. We have a national need, and we have a plan to meet that need, which doesn't meet the need. And so we looked at it and we said, look, we know these technologies exist. For example, when I was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, just before I was on that commission, we had various kinds of technologies that knitted all the radars in the fleet. We were very much into network-centric warfare. We could tell where a sea-skimming cruise missile was within a few fractions of a centimeter at any portion of a second in time. And so we wanted to take those technologies and move them over to the FAA and get the FAA energized to do something different than it had been doing before, and that is where the JPDO was born, out of that concept. And so now 5 years have gone by, and we find ourselves with a department, with the FAA, doing, I think, about the best they can under the circumstances. We've seen the Department of Transportation pretty much dedicated to this approach, and we've seen Congress dedicated to it. But at the same time, we see other parts of the government who don't seem to get the message. Despite the fact what this committee says, NASA goes again and continues to underfund its aeronautics, as you've pointed out in your statement. So there is concern that that the government in its entirety has not recognized the seriousness of the problem and really engaged to solve it. But I wouldn't place that blame on the FAA. I think they're doing the best they can under the circumstances.
It's taken us 3 years of fairly concerted effort to finally get to the point with the FAA where the FAA is actually buying in to the JPDO program, and I think this is refreshing, and I can only hope that we can bring the other agencies to this same point where they have an equivalent level of buy-in into their own programs and infrastructure to the JPDO.
You probably heard the sirens go off. We have a vote coming up, but I just want to make a comment, and then I'm going to submit some questions for the record that you can answer hopefully in the next couple of days back to the committee. But as you know, I think we're spending approximately $185 million in R&D money, which was extremely low I think relative to the agencies, what we're trying to do to create a safe environment for the future to fly increasing air traffic. In spite of our own parochial interests about airports nearby, the fact of the matter is air traffic will continue to increase and will continue to be an important and integral part of our economy, as it should be. And it's incumbent upon all of you, the experts, and those you work with to make sure that we have continue to have a safe and effective way to travel, and that the traveling public can look forward to that in the future. So you have a big job ahead of you, and really in a relatively short time frame, because I think the system that we have, it's been hobbled together and has been effective over the last number of years, is really, I don't think anyone here would disagree, has pretty much met its limitations. So anyway, as we move forward, there's been a lot of delays in this. I don't think we can delay any longer, and I look forward to working with you and working with the chairman to making sure that we have a safe and effective air traffic system for this country and continue to be the leaders in the world. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member for his comments and his questions, and clearly the ranking member has a significant and comprehensive grasp of not only the challenges here, but the opportunities that present themselves to us if we, I should say if, but when we implement the next-gen system. As the ranking member Calvert mentioned, we have a vote. I think the best use of our time, I'm going to temporarily recess the committee. I will go over and vote as quickly as I can, come back, and if the panel can stay, we'll hope to resume in 10 to 15 minutes because you've traveled a long way, and I want to take advantage of your expertise and insights. So we'll temporarily recess, and I'll be back as soon as I can. Thank you. There we go. Panel, you hear me now? Thank you for your forbearance. We'll get right back to questions. Mr. Leader, if I could direct a question at you, and then the panel in turn can respond. You stated the Next Gen initiative has a number of important research areas that need to be addressed if it is to succeed. In the joint resolution for fiscal year 2007, Congress wound up giving NASA's Aeronautics program an additional $187 million above the President's fiscal 07 request. Mr. Douglas, in his testimony, recommended that the additional NASA Aeronautics funding go towards next-gen related transitional R&D. How much would the next-gen initiative benefit from increased NASA funding of next-gen research needs? Could you tell us what projects and activities NASA should apply additional aeronautics funding to in order to best address the research needs of the next-gen initiative? And if I could get your thoughts now, I'd also like you to have you respond for the record.
Yes, sir, I will provide a response for the record. I have not thought of the issue in terms of the question as you framed it, in attempting to quantify it in financial terms. I can speak briefly to what our top R&D priorities are, though. Obviously, safety-related issues, because the National Airspace System is a safety system, is our highest factor, and relative to that, human factors work to support how flight crews and controllers would operate in the next-gen system remains critically important to us, as does support of our safety management system that would be predictive rather than forensic. We believe that there can be a significant contribution there as well. In addition, there are automation issues for conflict resolution that are going to be very important to maintaining separation required to increase capacity, and also relative to capacity would be wake vortex work that would drive separation procedures as well.
Thank you. Dr. Dillingham, have thoughts?
Chairman Udall, I think, we haven't looked at that real thoroughly, but we do have a couple of thoughts. One is, again, we want to commend JPDO for taking a wide-ranging look to try to determine what their research needs were and various ways in which they might be able to fund that R&D. But one thing that does come to mind for us, particularly at this stage of trying to move towards implementation, and that's our understanding is that NASA has a capabilities test bed where companies can come in and put their concept to the test in terms of whether it will work well in the NAS. It is also a situation where, if you're a small company, you can come in and use it free of charge, whereas a large company, like a Boeing or a Lockheed, they probably have their own. Our understanding is that NASA is not going to be upgrading that capability, and is something that can be very useful, we think, to the JPDO in the near term.
Thank you, Dr. Dillingham. Secretary Douglas, do you have a comment?
Just to add that we think that the area that needs a lot of emphasis is the systems engineering work and the phenomenology examination, like looking at wake vortex, some of the weather issues Dr. Carmichael has mentioned are excellent candidates for additional research by NASA. We also, Dr. Dillingham mentioned the modeling and the test beds that NASA has. Those things need to be funded and updated. Sir, one of the really interesting things that is going to happen as we get further into this, there are going to be periods of time when we're bringing the new system on, but we still have the old system. And how do you run two things in parallel so that you have the confidence you can take the old one down now and depend on the new one? That requires a lot of modeling. We've done those kind of things before in the Department of Defense, and they're not easy. So I think there's a pretty good shopping list. Now, let me just add one caveat to it that I think helps put it in context. You know, NASA is struggling to create a new system beyond the shuttle. And the NASA administrator is keenly aware of the fact that there's a 10-year gap from 2010 to now it's almost up to a 5-year gap where we have no access to space, essentially. And so the NASA administrator is under a lot of pressure, of course, to close that gap, and that it's going to take more money to do that. And so I think you have to look at NASA's decision-making in the context of the other problems that they have. But clearly, for the benefit of the nation, we need to fund these aeronautic shortfalls.
Do you have any additional comments?
I do. The next gen is predicated on the notion of a trajectory-based air traffic management system. And by that, we mean that the aircraft and the system have a contract that at a particular point of time, an aircraft is supposed to be at a certain place in this four-dimensional space. To do that absolutely requires accurate weather information. Where the weather is in space, to a large extent, is determined by where the weather is. Now, as you're designing an air traffic system, and NASA has done this for years, they're very good at building a system for the nominal case. In other words, on a clear day, the automated systems work really well. Put a little weather in, and everything becomes nonlinear. So one of the things that we have been pressing NASA to do is essentially a new start. We're saying you do great work on building air traffic decision support tools, but now we're asking you to start building those tools with weather integrated into those tools from day one. This is a new start, and to get a new start kind of activity within NASA right now is exceptionally difficult. So that's our issue.
Chairman, I might add one
Yes.
afterthought to that, and that is that this work on weather phenomenology has a lot of benefit to our Department of Defense as well. You can imagine the effect that weather can have on combat operations. So when you think about us as a nation investing in this work, there's multiple payoffs beyond just the air traffic control system, sir.
That's a very, very good point. Just so the panel's aware, we have another vote scheduled in 40 or so minutes, I believe. If you all could stay till lunchtime, till noon or so, I'd really appreciate it. We've got looks like I should say, a series of additional questions I'd like to extend to you, but I think we could cover most, if not all of them, over the next 30 minutes or so. And Mr. Leader, I'm not tending to pick on you first every question, but I would like to start with you again. And I wanted to mention last week we had an FAA R&D hearing, and several of the witnesses there indicated that one of the key challenges facing the Next Gen initiative is how to transition to agreed-upon next-gen technologies and procedures into the National Airspace System expeditiously, and I think Mr. Douglas was speaking to that earlier. They and other observers are concerned that the FAA and the JPDO don't appear to have a clear plan for implementing those technologies and procedures in a timely fashion. And my set of questions to you include, is that a valid concern? If not, what are your specific plans for getting such technologies and procedures into the National Airspace System as soon as possible? Do you have clear and well-defined agreements on certification and operational procedures, approval for such things as ADS-B or the operation of military UAVs in the National Airspace System? And then to make your job even easier, if not, why not, and when will you? And then I'll put the other witnesses on notice that also would appreciate your comments if you'd like to do so after Mr. Leader.
Yes, sir. We do believe we have an ever clearer and evolving approach to implementation, and it's it's a challenge to explain it because it is not a blanket approach. The relationship between JPDO and the partner departments and agencies is, for fairly obvious reasons, fundamentally different. With FAA, with whom we have the largest relationship in the sense that FAA will fund and implement the largest part and subsequently operate the next generation system, we are working with them through the Evolved Operational Evolution Partnership, which is the process by which concepts and requirements from JPDO will be installed into the planning and execution systems within the FAA. But that is an FAA-specific process. Within the Department of Commerce, our primary interest is obviously weather, and we are moving forward in an effort involving FAA, Department of Commerce, and Department of Defense to bring forward to the Senior Policy Committee early this summer a specific recommendation for the creation of a joint office that would pursue weather research development and creation ultimately of tools to be used by the three agencies involved. Within the Department of Defense, there is a recommendation awaiting approval to create a program office that would be specifically dedicated to the next generation system and to whose charter would be to manage the exchange between JPDO and Defense, as well as to implement oversee implementing programs, joint programs with them. With NASA, our primary interaction is, as we've discussed earlier, in the area of research and development, and we have recently provided our desired research guidance to them and are working very closely with NASA to clarify that. So I think you can see that in each case we are evolving how we will transition from the theory of the case within JPDO into the actual implementation into the next-gen system.
Other witnesses care to comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think what we mentioned earlier in our testimony about the operational evolutionary partnership between FAA and JPDO is very important. It sort of is the process by which they're going to move these new technologies into the NAS. However, the question that you ask is very important because it brings up a couple of integrated points. One is the need to have these key planning documents, concept of operations, enterprise architecture, and the like, because that, in fact, sort of is the blueprint, describes how things are going to be integrated together. You need that in order to go to the next step, which is to decide about the necessary regulations and human factors research that needs to be undertaken. Tied to that is the need for R&D monies, which we've just got to talking about in terms of the concern about enough not being available and organizations not being identified to do it. So there are positive things on some side, but the need to get these documents finally completed so that they serve as the base to move forward is also very critical.
Mr. Douglas.
Yes, sir. I have a couple of comments. I think it was you in your opening statement noted that this September we'll lose our FAA administrator. We've already lost the head of the air traffic office. The Institute recently lost its staff director for a variety of reasons. Some of these problems have to do with the complexity of the task, and some are just inevitable. I mean, the administrator is moving because it's the end of her 5-year term. When Congress plays its role in bringing a new administrator in, I would strongly urge Congress to be mindful of the skill sets that this next administrator is going to need, which is someone who understands how big systems like this are pulled together and managed. Another thought that would I think needs to be put into the mix here is I think the senior policy committee has probably suffered a little bit because we've changed from one Secretary of Transportation to another, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the current Secretary. I just mean when you change people, it takes a while for everybody to get up and so on. But clearly, this project is going to need someone at the very top of the FAA who understands systems acquisition. It's going to need some kind of a forcing function to keep everybody working together. And if it's not the SPC, I'm not sure what it would be unless it's somebody up here on the Hill who really rides very close herd on this in a way that is difficult for an oversight committee to do. So I am concerned. I think industry is watching to make sure that we do have some way of pulling this all together, because it is a very difficult task, and sir, it's an episodic task. It's important to remember that we only do this about every 40 or 50 years, so it isn't like over in the Pentagon when you go from one fighter program to the next, you have a whole group of people who just finished the last one, you can kind of move them over to the new one and so on. This is something that we do rarely, and there aren't a lot of people here today who invented the last system. And so we have to kind of relearn certain things as we go along, and that's going to require central control of some magnitude, in my opinion, sir.
Dr. Dillingham, did you have an additional comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to sort of give a footnote to what Mr. Douglas said. I think the statute that created the position for Chief Operating Officer for the Air Traffic Organization in FAA, which is sort of the match for JPDO, created a 5-year term, the potential of a 5-year term for that position. Mr. Chu was able to fill that position for 3 years. I think as FAA goes out to find a new Chief Operating Officer, that to the extent that someone can commit themselves to the 5-year term might be important. We're at a point now that, as we move from planning to, implementation, if you've got somebody that's going to be there for 5 years, it's a better shot than if you've got them there for less time than that.
Dr. Carmichael, did you have any thoughts on the various questions that have been posed?
Just wanted to put a footnote on Mr. Leader's comment about the joint weather activity. In today's world, there are 3 weather forecasting services in this nation. There are 2 in DOD, one in the Air Force and one in the Navy, and then there is the National Weather Service. And if a pilot asked the same question about the weather over central Kansas at 10,000 feet at 5 o'clock this afternoon, they may very well get 3 different answers. A DOD is under extreme pressure, budgetary pressure, even though the defense budgets are high. That money is not going to the people who do aviation weather forecasting. And so they're under pressure to streamline, to be more efficient and effective in aviation weather. And so they have a strong desire to collaborate with the Weather Service and with the JPDO in this joint weather activity. It's to the benefit of the FAA, NOAA, and DOD to have a single entity that is providing an aviation weather service for all. And so I'm very hopeful that this new joint activity is going to be successful.
Mr. Douglas, did you have a follow-on thought as well?
I just was going to say I agree with Dr. Dillingham. I think those 5-year terms that came about both for the administrator and for the ATO officer are well served, and I would hope that when we replace Mr. Chu, we could find somebody who would give us a 5-year commitment.
Let me move to my next question, if I might. We and the Congress will be reauthorizing the FAA this year, and this committee will play an important role in that reauthorization process. And I thought since I had you all here, I'd ask if you have any thoughts on specific legislative provisions that we ought to include as a part of this reauthorization process. And Mr. Leader, I'm going to assume that you would suggest we adopt the administration's FAA proposal. I'm going to let you off the hook and
Yes, sir, that is a very safe assumption.
and start with Dr. Dillingham. Let you catch your breath this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, overall, what we understand about the programs that are being changed or modified for reauthorization, we don't find any serious problems with that. However, we have raised some concerns about the funding mechanism that is being proposed for the FAA. Specifically, we are concerned about the basis of the cost allocation system that they have set up to charge user fees, and we've testified before that this is a pretty complicated proposal that hasn't had that much time for people to look at and evaluate. So we would caution going forward with something so dramatic as what's being proposed in terms of funding.
Douglas.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. When I think about this, I'm mindful of that scene in the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where the three convicts are chained together and the two guys on the outside are arguing who's going to be the lead on the team, and the guy in the middle says, well, I'm for you fellers. Our business, we sell to both the general aviation community and to the airlines. Our products go across the industry, and we are reluctant to be caught between those two communities in their dispute about who should pay more for the use of the system. The one part of the current proposal, though, that we really don't like is there are user fees in there for the certification of new products, and if you read the language, Mr. Chairman, it's very open-ended. It's lots of the administrator may, and then there's a long list of things that you could put user fees on, and no bounding of that. And we believe that the certification process in the civil aviation part of our industry is an inherently government function, and it should be funded through the FAA, just like when we produce our military products. The Department of Defense has a part of its organization that inspects them and makes sure they're built correctly and so on. And we think, we like the way the FAA is currently doing it today and would like to see the current system maintained rather than go to use some sort of user fee system for certification of new products. That's our principal concern with the new proposal.
Dr. Carmichael, do you have any thoughts on the reauthorization of the FAA?
I won't address the method of funding.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to say that if we're going to accomplish what we are planning to accomplish with the next gen, it's absolutely critical that we have stable funding, predictable funding, that we can build a multi-year research program to accomplish. And so the stability of that funding is critical.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. I can't help but relate a quick story that Judge Hall, I think, told me, Congressman Hall, ranking member on this committee, when a public official was faced with a particularly thorny issue and asked what his position was, he said, well, some of my friends are for it, some of my friends are against it. I'm for my friends. It sounds like that's the position that you think is most appropriate here.
That's exactly our position, Mr. Chairman.
Let me turn to Dr. Carmichael and take advantage of his deep expertise when it comes to weather and weather analysis, weather forecasting. Near the end of your testimony, you raised concerns about NASA's and the impact of NASA's restructured aeronautics program on important aviation weather research initiatives. And this is, unfortunately, a refrain we've heard from a wide variety of expert witnesses, and I hope Congress and the White House will heed those warnings and take corrective action. So that we could better understand what's at stake, could you please elaborate a bit on the nature of your concerns and what the consequences of a NASA re-entrenchment in these aviation weather-related research area would likely to be?
Well, let me first of all be clear that it's not our position that we expect NASA to be in their aeronautics program to be performing weather research. What we are asking NASA to do, because they are the experts in automation system research, is we're asking NASA to team with the folks who do aviation weather research to build automation decision support tools that have weather tightly coupled into the algorithms inside those systems. So that is what we think is critical. Now, if NASA doesn't do that work, then I think the fallback position is that the FAA has to have funding to find other ways to do that work. MITRE Corporation, MITRE CASD, probably is the beneficiary of building a workforce on FAA funding to do that work if NASA is not able to do it. And I would like to put a footnote also on this the question of funding. You know, currently the R&D is divided up into buckets. There is a safety bucket and there is a capacity bucket. And weather sometimes falls victim to this notion of where does it fit? Is it safety or is it capacity? And sometimes these artificial labels cause problems in allocating and managing funds. So I would ask that, if possible, with the funding, that somehow weather be recognized as funding that is not easily put into either a safety or a capacity bucket. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to calling on you further, given your expertise and insights into these really important areas, as we discussed before the hearing began. Let me turn back to Mr. Leader. In your testimony, you refer to a number of agreed-upon next-gen technologies, including the ADS-B, SWIM, next-gen enabled weather, and the NAS voice switch. And obviously, a timely transition into the National Aerospace System will be key to the success of the next-gen initiative. When will each of those systems be fully implemented into the NAS? And please provide for the record, if necessary. I know these are fairly complicated dynamics here. And what prevents them from being fully implemented earlier?
That is a question, sir, that I'll have to answer for you for the record later.
Thank you, and we look forward to that answer. Those answers. Dr. Dillingham, in your testimony at last week's T&I Aviation Subcommittee hearing, you reported that the, quote, FAA has begun reviewing its existing safety regulations developed for manned aircraft to determine how or whether they need to be modified to enable UASs to be safely integrated into the National Airspace System. FAA expects this to be a 5 to 10 year effort, and that was the end of the quotes of the statement I have here. Given the growing expectations for UAS applications, do you regard this as a timely response? And if not, what would you recommend be done?
Chairman Udall, we currently have a study underway that is addressing that question. It has been raised by several members of Congress whether this is actually too long a lead time, in that state governments, local governments are increasingly wanting to use UASs. So if you would allow us to get a little further along with our research, we certainly would report back to you on that point.
Do you have a time sense of when that might happen? Not so much the reporting back, but the actual initiative itself, or would you like that to be a part of your...
I would like that to be a part of what we report back to the record.
Should other government entities be involved, other government agencies?
Beyond the FAA?
Yes.
Yes, sir. I mean, I think that, and they are involved in it at this point. I think DOD is involved in it for sure. And I'm not sure, and Homeland Security is also involved in it. So what we're doing is we're trying to see to what extent they're coordinating their work, and we're also trying to see if there are some lessons learned that we can get from international UAS activities.
Excellent. Dr. Carmichael, you've testified to the great potential of unmanned aircraft for targeted observations of the atmosphere to improve forecasts. Do you think the JPDO is moving fast enough to include unmanned aircraft in the NAS?
I think this is another area where NASA could play an extremely beneficial role. We focus a lot on how do we integrate the unmanned aircraft into the system, but from a weather standpoint, it provides a tremendously valuable opportunity for us to seek observations in areas where we need observations to improve the forecast. And those areas may differ from day to day. So the ability to actually move an observing platform where you need it, together with weather observations, can make a significant improvement in the weather forecast. So I think this is another area where NASA could be extremely helpful. As far as I understand now, they have no program in this area.
Let me follow on. You testified that, quote, unmanned aerial systems will also require more precise weather forecasts. That was the end of the quote.
Yes.
Does that comment imply that you believe in some ways unmanned aircraft control won't be as robust as piloted aircraft?
No, what I mean by that is that the unmanned aircraft systems span a broad range of capabilities. And some of those aircraft are going to be very, very weather sensitive. So it's important to have weather that's going to be suitable for all classes of unmanned aerial operations, all the way from things that may be the size of your thumb or your hand, all the way up to huge aircraft. And as you might guess, the smaller aircraft may be very weather sensitive.
I could continue asking questions, but I have other appointments over the noon hour, and I'm sure all of you do as well. Before I bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank all of you for appearing here today before the committee, and your testimony has been very thought-provoking and helpful. If there's no objection, the record will remain open for additional statements from the members, for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned.